This is a lecture on climates and biomes from Chapter 7, Part 1. What is climate? Climate includes temperature ranges and precipitation patterns in a region over the time periods ranging from 30 years to 1,000 or more years. Why does the Earth have many different climates? It is because of uneven heating of the Earth's surface. So the Earth is situated on a little bit of a tilt. So when the sun's rays hit the Earth, some of the areas of the Earth are getting 90-degree angles of sunshine, while other areas closer to the poles, for example, are getting a lower angle. So where the sun's rays hit at 90-degree angles, the sun's rays are stronger. Where the sun is hitting at a lower angle, see the angle here between the sunlight and the Earth, it's a smaller angle. Whereas here it's about 90 degrees. So the smaller angle areas are going to be cooler. Whereas here you have more intense sun. It's going to be hotter. Now I mentioned the tilt. The different angles of the sunlight would happen even if the Earth were completely perpendicular and not on a tilt, but we'll see in a few minutes what the tilt has to do with the different climates on Earth. As we could see here, this is the average solar radiation that's received by the Earth's surface over the course of a year. And you can see the higher amounts of sunlight that is received is the warmer colors, red, orange, yellow. And that is around the tropical areas. So we have the Tropic of Capricorn down here and the Tropic of Cancer up here. And you can see that is where some of our highest amounts of sunlight received is located. And then you have the equator, which is 0 degrees. So the uneven heating between the poles and the tropics results in heat as well as moisture that spreads from the tropical zones that's between the Tropic of Cancer and the Tropic of Capricorn, spreads toward the poles. And this is spread by air circulation and through ocean currents. And it is spread by the process of convection in the atmosphere, as well as convection in the ocean. So the main points of convection are that hot air rises. So you start out in the tropical areas where you have your rainforests and your hot air is rising. And there is moisture in that air. And when the hot air rises, it expands and cools. And when the air cools, the moisture that's in it condenses and forms precipitation. So then you have a lot of rain. And that's how you get your rainforests, which are hot and humid with lots of rain. And this sets up a low air pressure system with a warm and wet climate. The other main point of convection is that cold air sinks. So now this cool air up here, that, by the way, keep in mind, it just rained out a lot of its moisture. So the cool air is going to start to sink because it is more dense than surrounding air. So dense cold air sinks. As the air sinks, it compresses. That means that the molecules get closer together. And when that happens, the air gets warmer. So you have warm air that most of or all of the moisture rained out over here. So you actually have warm, dry air sinking, and that forms your major deserts. And that sets up a high air pressure system. So near the equator, in the tropical areas, you have hot air rising, moisture in the air condenses, and you have a lot of precipitation, and you have lots of rainforests. So convection in the atmosphere actually creates 6 different cells called the Hadley cells. So global air circulation consists of 6 of these convection cells. So up by the northern latitudes, this is around 60 degrees north, you have rising air, and then you have the sinking air. So here you have sinking, here you have rising, here you have sinking, rising. And this happens all across these latitudes here. So they're showing you the convection on the side of the Earth here, but it happens across the whole section. And over here, it's showing you that the winds, the global winds are set up by this convection, and then it is affected by the Coriolis effect. So here we have the northeast trade winds, and winds are named for the direction that they come from. So these winds come from the northeast and they travel towards the southwest. So those are the trade winds. And then 0 to 30 degrees south, you have the southeast trade winds. And they converge, these 2 wind belt patterns converge at the equator region, where they are traveling westward. That's good for ships that are traveling west. You just go down to this section here, and if you're on an old-fashioned sailboat, it brings you westward. And then you have the westerlies in the mid-latitudes that are traveling toward the northeast. And then you have the westerlies in the southern mid-latitudes as well. And you can see each section here where the air is rising, you have a lot of precipitation. And where the air is sinking, you have your deserts. So a lot of rain here, a lot of forests in that area. Forests here, desert there, your forests there. And wherever the air is sinking, those are your high air pressure systems. And where your air is rising, that's your low air pressure systems. And I mentioned the Coriolis effect a couple of minutes ago. The Coriolis effect results in ocean currents and major wind belts being deflected to the right in the northern hemisphere and deflected to the left in the southern hemisphere. And that is due to the Earth's rotation. So if you were air going from the equator northward on this black line, if that's your intended path, you would be deflected on this purple path curved to the right. So that's the Coriolis effect. The Coriolis effect only works on large scale things like ocean currents and wind belts. If you were throwing a baseball, the baseball would not be affected by Coriolis effect. It has to be a large scale system. So this diagram shows you wind belts and moisture belts. And it says in the troposphere is your lower part of the atmosphere. So here you have a wet zone. Here's a dry zone. Here's a wet zone. And then you have your wind belts showing the direction. And this is very similar to the previous diagram. It also shows you the convection cells. So the wind belts that are deflected by the Coriolis effect are called prevailing winds. So in the mid latitudes where we live, those are your westerlies. And again, prevailing winds are named for the direction they're coming from. Prevailing winds are major surface wind belts, and they blow continuously, and they help distribute heat and moisture over the Earth's surface, and they help to drive the ocean currents. Prevailing winds are also important for storm tracking and for air pollution. For example, in the United States, the major wind direction is from southwest to northeast. So those are, again, those are our westerly winds. And pollution in the air, as well as storm systems, follow this pattern. And here we have a visualization from July 2012 showing wildfires in the West. And you can see the smoke moving eastward. And this is a more recent picture showing you smoke from fires in the West. And they are moving eastward. So your fires are here and the smoke moves eastward with those westerly winds. Prevailing winds that blow over the oceans produce mass movements of surface water, and the mass movements of surface water are called ocean currents. And ocean currents help redistribute heat from the sun. So the ocean in the equatorial region is getting a lot of heat from the sun, and then the ocean currents bring some of that heat poleward. So this influences climate and vegetation, especially near coastal areas. For example, parts of Europe should actually be colder than they are, but the warm Gulf Stream moderates the climate there. So here is the Gulf Stream, and it originates in the equatorial region, or rather the tropical region. Sorry. The tropical area here, you have a lot of warm water, and some of that warm water is going to travel northward and then eastward toward Europe. So if you look at the latitudes of parts of Europe, they end up the same latitude as parts of Canada, where we think of as being really cold, different times of the year. But the British Isles, for example, are warmer than their corresponding latitudes in Canada. And that's because the Gulf Stream is bringing warm water there. So Europe is more moderate temperatures than it should otherwise be based on their latitude. Again, ocean currents are driven by prevailing winds, and they're also deflected by the Coriolis effect. So we end up getting circular patterns of ocean currents that flow between continents. Ocean currents circulate clockwise in the northern hemisphere and counterclockwise in the southern hemisphere. And you have warm ocean currents and cool ocean currents. And this diagram shows you warm currents are the black solid arrow, and cool currents are the white arrow. So you have a cold Antarctic circumpolar current. You have warm currents that travel southward along the east coast of South America, and you have cool currents that go northward along the west coast of South America. Here we have the Gulf Stream. Again, that's a warm current that goes toward Europe. And then you have this cold Labrador current. On the west coast of California, you have the California current, which is cold water. So if you were to go from where we are and you go across the same latitude, their ocean water and climate is a little bit colder than we are here because of the Gulf Stream keeping us a little bit warmer. So here you could fill in which current is the closest to where we live. You could fill that in right there. Just look on the map where you live and look at what the closest current is. What about air masses? An air mass is a large volume of air in the atmosphere that is mostly uniform in temperature and moisture. There are 4 categories based on latitude. You have the Arctic, and that air mass forms in the Arctic, which is very cold. You have tropical air masses, which are formed in the low latitudes, and those are moderately warm. You have polar air masses, which are formed in high latitudes, and those are cold, as opposed to very cold, which is the Arctic. Equatorial is near the equator, and that is a warm air mass. And then there were 2 categories of air masses based on if they form over water or land. So maritime air masses form over water, and those are humid air masses. Continental air masses form over land, and they are dry. And here is a map that shows you different air masses. So you have continental Arctic, which is very dry, very cold and dry. Continental polar is cold and dry. Maritime tropical is warm and moist. Continental tropical, warm and dry. Maritime tropical, warm and moist. Maritime polar, cold and moist. And these air masses generally stay mostly over the same locations. They may move a little bit north and south depending on the location of the jet stream. So the jet stream is a strong air belt, or wind belt rather, that flows generally through this spot right here. And the jet stream can move north or south. And when it moves a little bit north, it brings the warm and dry air northward. When the jet stream moves southward, it brings the cold and dry air southward. This diagram shows you the jet stream, and the air masses south of the jet stream are the warmer air masses, and the colder air masses are north of the jet stream. And like I was just saying, if the jet stream moves a little bit southward, it brings the cold air southward. If it moves a little bit northward, it brings warm air northward a little bit. Now we're going to discuss climate zones of the Earth. Climate zones are dependent mainly on latitude. So how far are you north of the equator, or how far south are you from the equator? So here are some examples of different geographic zones with different types of climate based on latitude. So the equatorial zone, which is tropical. Then you have subtropical, which is your low latitudes. For example, in your 20-degree latitude zones. Your mid-latitude region, that's around where we're located. That's about 40 degrees latitude, as an example. Subarctic is around 60. And then your Arctic and polar regions are your high latitudes, or closer to 90 degrees. And this shows you where on the map those areas are located. So Wayne, New Jersey, for example, is 40.9 degrees north latitude. So that is in your mid-latitude region. So features at the Earth's surface can affect local climate. Let's compare Baltimore, Maryland, and San Francisco, California. They are both approximately similar latitude, but they have different climates. So these graphs are based on weather reports from 1992 to 2021. And you can see the high temperatures in the middle of the summer in Baltimore are quite a bit warmer, 84, 88, 86, compared to San Francisco, where the high temperatures are in the low 70s. And then you can see down here, this is the amount of precipitation. You have quite a bit more precipitation in the summer than you do in San Francisco, where there's hardly any precipitation in the summer. And here we have the comparisons of different features of Baltimore versus San Francisco. And again, they're very similar latitudes, but why are there different climates in these locations? So we look at the elevation. Baltimore is about 719 feet at the maximum. So that's pretty low to sea level. It's not a very high mountainous area. San Francisco is almost 2,500 feet as the maximum elevation. And in Baltimore, you're near the coast with a warm ocean current. That's the Gulf Stream we talked about earlier. And San Francisco, you're near a cold ocean current, the California current, which is cold ocean water, which we also discussed earlier. So these factors give you different climates in these two different cities. I would say mostly it's related to the ocean current. So features at the Earth's surface can affect local climates, and you have mountains as well as proximity to water versus being inland. So when you're surrounded by land versus being near bodies of water, water has a moderating effect because heat is absorbed and released more slowly by water. So you have a more moderate temperature when you live near the coast compared to being further inland. And in a mountainous area, you're going to have cooler climates. Also, there's something called a rain shadow desert, which we'll discuss in a few minutes. So let's go over the details related to the moderating effect of living near the water. So we can think about it this way. Have you ever been to the beach and maybe you noticed that the sand is really hot during the day, but that the water is cold? So water absorbs heat more slowly than the land and releases heat more slowly than land as well. And then conversely, land heats up and cools down more quickly. So at night, the water is going to be warmer because it took the whole day to warm up, and the sand is going to be cold because the sand cools down pretty quickly. So you can see that land heats up and cools down pretty quickly, and water takes a long time to heat up and cool down. So how does this affect climate? So coastal areas have more moderate temperatures because the ocean water absorbs heat all summer, and that provides warm, moist air to these coastal areas long after the summer ends. So in the summer, areas near the coast are generally cooler than areas further inland because of the ocean breezes cooling off the land. In the winter, areas near the coast are generally warmer than areas further inland because the heat is still in the ocean that the ocean absorbed all summer long. And then that heat radiates to the coastal areas, keeping it a little bit warmer than areas further inland. So if you live near the coast, you may have noticed that when the weather forecast calls for snow, that you may get rain locally and areas further inland are getting snow. So that is because of the moderating effects of being near the ocean, where the ocean is still holding heat energy that it absorbed during the summer months. And then high mountains and its effect on climate. Air is colder as you go up in altitude. So as you go up a mountain, the air is actually colder. And then also we have the rain shadow deserts, which we'll talk about. So as you go up in elevation, the biomes can change in a similar way that climate changes when you go from the equator to the North Pole. So if you were to start out in a mountainous area in the tropical region, you would start out, let's say, with a tropical rainforest. And then as you go up the mountain, you get a deciduous forest, coniferous forest, which is pine cone trees. Then you get a tundra, and then all the way at the top, mountain, ice and snow. Of course, this all depends on how high your mountain is. And then as you go from the equator to the North Pole, you change the biomes in the same pattern. So biomes change in elevation in the same pattern that climate and biomes change as you go from the equator to the North Pole or the South Pole. So what is the rain shadow effect? The rain shadow effect leads to the formation of deserts. So we can start out by looking on the left side of this diagram. And we could remember that winds travel eastward in the mid-latitude regions. Those are your westerly winds. So prevailing winds are picking up moisture from, let's say, the Pacific Ocean on the west coast of the United States. And then this moist air is moving in the westerly wind belt. And then if it hits, let's say, the Sierra Nevada mountains, it's forced up the mountain. So the air is forced up the mountain. That is called orographic lifting. That means air is being forced to rise over an obstacle as opposed to air rising because it is warm air, right? So normally air rises when it's warm, but in this case, you're forcing the air to rise. So going up the Sierra Nevada mountains, the air is forced up and air is going to expand. The molecules get further apart because we learned earlier that when air rises, it expands. And that expansion causes the air to cool. And then the moisture in the air is going to condense. And then you're going to have rain. And you know it has moisture in it because it came off of the Pacific Ocean. So it's carrying moisture from the ocean. So you're going to rain a lot on what's called the windward side of the Sierra Nevada mountains. And then on the other side of the mountain is called the leeward side. And there the air is going to go down the mountain, which we call descending. And when air sinks, it warms up. And because most or all of the moisture was released from the air on the other side of the mountain, you have the air is very dry. So you have air that is falling or descending, it's warming up, and it's dry. So that is going to give you a desert on this side of the Sierra Nevada mountains. Here is another diagram showing you the same thing. The westerly winds going up the mountain, you have rain, and then the leeward side, the air descends, it compresses and heats up, and you get dry, hot air sinking down, and you get a desert. So this type of desert is called a rain shadow desert. So how does climate affect biodiversity? Climate helps to determine where organisms can live. So precipitation and temperature patterns in an area will give us different climate zones. So we have tropical, which is hot and humid, temperate, which is your moderate climate zone, and your polar, which is cold climate zone. It's also pretty dry, so we do actually have polar deserts. And we can look on this map, which has different climate zones. The white is polar ice. That makes sense. Greenland, Antarctica. Your orange is warm temperate, and so on. You could read the different colors. Now, this green here that says cool temperate, that is where we are here. So that answers this question on the bottom. Generally speaking, we are in the cool temperate climate. You can also look at your ocean currents. The warm is in red, the cold is in blue. Again, that shows you the Gulf Stream and the California current that I mentioned earlier for San Francisco versus Baltimore. And then we have something called upwelling. Upwelling areas are shown with this blue color here. So upwelling is different areas of the ocean where the currents are bringing nutrients from the cold ocean bottom up to the surface waters. And those are also going to be cold water. So it's nutrient rich cold water from the deep ocean, and that is carried upward to the ocean surface. So these are different upwelling areas, lots of nutrients. Biomes are large terrestrial regions characterized by specific climate and whatever plants are the most dominant in the area. So, for example, a tropical rainforest is a type of biome. So, the climate would be the tropical word, and the rainforest would tell us plant. The plant is trees. So, here are the major biomes. You have your Arctic tundra, temperate grassland, chaparral, coniferous forest, temperate deciduous forest. So if you look at this color green, it's this color green here. We live in the temperate deciduous forest biome. This diagram shows you the different biomes that go across the United States at the 39° north latitude. So here we have the prevailing winds, the westerly winds that go from the west to the east. And here is San Francisco, which we talked about earlier. And that is called coastal chaparral and scrub, which is small trees. Then you go up the Sierra Nevada and you get coniferous forest. That means you have pine trees. And then on the leeward side of the Sierra Nevada mountains, you have a rain shadow desert. That's, for example, Las Vegas is included in there. That's your rain shadow desert. Then you have the Rocky Mountains, which is more coniferous forest. And then on the leeward side of the Rocky Mountains, you have another dry area, and that includes the city of Denver. Denver is in a rain shadow of the Rockies. That is your dry prairie grassland. It's actually sunny in Denver about 300 days of the year. Okay, so that's your dry prairie. That is a grassland. Then you continue going eastward. You get your Mississippi River Valley. And then you have the Appalachian Mountains, which is all deciduous forest. And then here's Baltimore, which we also talked about earlier. And then there's the Atlantic Ocean. This is sort of a graph of precipitation and temperature, but instead of a regular looking graph, the x-axis is on a curve that kind of looks like the Earth. And so is the y-axis and the x-axis are curved, kind of looking like part of the Earth. So down here on the y-axis, you have hot, and here's cold. And then here on the x-axis, you have wet and dry. So the way you read it is where it's hot and wet, you have tropical rainforest. Where you have medium in between hot and cold, you're going to get your temperate deciduous forest to your evergreen coniferous forest. And then when you go into your dry, hot, you have tropical deserts. Dry, as you get towards the colder temperature, you get colder deserts, Arctic tundra. And then in your middle between hot and cold and wet and dry, you have chaparral. And then your grasslands is warmer than the chaparral and still in the middle of being dry and wet. The next section will provide a summary of different biomes, including deserts, grasslands, and forests. We will start with deserts. So a desert is a climate where there is a permanent moisture deficit. That means evaporation rates are greater than the amount of precipitation. Notice that temperature is not mentioned in the definition of a desert. And you can have cold deserts, you can have hot deserts. So desert is all based on the moisture deficit. Your major deserts are related to global air pressure belts, your subtropical high pressure zone. The subtropical high pressure is related to sinking dry air around 20 to 30 degrees latitude. And these are called your tropical deserts. And we talked about this earlier, but again, here is your equatorial region that receives your highest amounts of solar energy. And then the warm air is going to rise. Here are some arrows. These are the Hadley cell convection cells that we talked about earlier. So the warm air rises, you have cooling of the air, condensation of the moisture, and rain. So you get your rain in the tropical rainforests. And then now this dry, cold air that is up here is going to sink at around 20 to 30 degrees latitude. So the air is going to sink. As air sinks, it compresses and gets warmer. So here you have air falling, and that gives you what's called a high air pressure system. Where air sinks, it's a high pressure. Where air is rising, it's called low air pressure. You could think of it as the air is pushing down on the surface of the earth as it sinks. So it's like higher air pressure pushing downward, as opposed to when air is rising, it's less pressure being put on the surface of the earth because it's rising, it's going away from you. So that gives you low air pressure. Okay, so where the air is sinking, it's dry. Again, all the moisture left in the rainforests. So you have hot, dry air sinking around 20 to 30 degree latitude. That is going to be your major deserts. And that belt is called the subtropical high. It's a whole high pressure area going around the earth at that latitude. And that's where you have your major deserts like the Sahara Desert. The Sahara Desert is associated with the subtropical high air pressure system. So this is where your Sahara Desert is. Okay, again, it spans from about 20 to 30 degree latitude. So your Sahara is like in here. Here. That's your Sahara. Deserts that are not related to the subtropical high pressure system. In the mid latitudes, those deserts are due to being rain shadow deserts, which we already covered. You could also have deserts related to being in the middle of continent. That would be like the continental warm air masses. For example, in Central Asia, you have a continental air mass over the interior of Asia, and you are so far away from moisture bearing air masses that you have persistent dry air over Central Asia. So here we have the Mojave Desert, an example of the mid-latitude rain shadow desert. This is what it looks like. And then we have the Gobi Desert of Mongolia and China. And this is where it is. Again, that is from a persistent continental air mass that is dry. It's not a warm desert, it's more of a cold desert. Okay, so it's like I have written here, it is not a hot desert. It is a cool desert, cold desert. Okay, and that again is from a persistent continental air mass. Very dry. You're not near the ocean. Asia is a humongous air mass, land mass, sorry. So because Asia is so large, the middle of Asia is far away from the oceans. So deserts have low annual precipitation that is unevenly distributed throughout the year. Temperatures fluctuate greatly between day and night. That's because land heats up and cools down quickly. Desert soils take a very long time to recover from disturbances such as off-road vehicles or sporadic storms. And that's because deserts have slow plant growth, not a lot of different types of species, which is low species diversity, and slow nutrient cycling and very little water. So these soils in deserts are very thin. So there are three major categories of deserts, mainly varying by latitude. You have your tropical deserts, which are hot and dry most of the year, very few plants, and those are associated with the subtropical high pressure system. Your temperate deserts have high daytime temperatures in the summer and low in the winter. Sparse vegetation is mostly cacti and other succulents. And these temperate deserts are mostly mid-latitude rain shadow deserts. And then your cold deserts have sparse vegetation, cold summers, and precipitation can even be snow or fog, but it's low amounts of precipitation. And the cold deserts are mostly your continental interiors, particularly in Asia. You also do have polar deserts as well. Okay, so I added polar deserts here as well. Okay, and these are climographs, and all of these climographs represent data from the northern hemisphere deserts, where June and July are the summertime months in the northern hemisphere. Remember, in the southern hemisphere, the seasons are switched, they're opposite. Precipitation is shown in blue on the bottom, and the red line is your temperature. And these are the months: January, February, March, April, etc. Temperatures are shown in degrees Celsius. Precipitation is in millimeters. So tropical deserts, you have almost no precipitation most of the year, except for November, December, and January, you do have a little bit of precipitation. Your temperate deserts, you have a little more precipitation than your tropical deserts. Your temperatures in the winter are colder than your tropical deserts, but warmer than your cold deserts. See, the cold deserts, the cold temperature goes lower than the other two deserts. You do have more precipitation in the summer. This climograph of the cold desert, for example, would be the Gobi Desert. Now we will talk about grasslands. Grasslands are related to seasonal changes, which we will discuss the details. So the location of where the sun's strongest rays are varies a little bit as the Earth revolves around the sun. And this is because the Earth is tilted on its axis. So during the summer solstice time, which is about June 21st, the northern hemisphere is pointed towards the sun. So the Tropic of Cancer is actually where the sun's rays are the strongest. And then the winter solstice, December 21st, the southern hemisphere is pointed toward the sun, and the northern hemisphere is pointed away from the sun. So the Tropic of Capricorn in the December is where the strongest rays are. And then during the equinoxes, which is autumn and spring, the equator is where the strongest sun's rays are. So the strongest sun rays shift between the Tropic of Cancer, the equator, and the Tropic of Capricorn throughout the year. And you can see that in the diagram here as well. So your equinoxes here, the sun's strongest rays hit the equator. The equator you can't see on this side here. Tropic of Capricorn, Tropic of Cancer. And all of this is because the Earth is tilted. So when the most direct sun rays hit the Tropic of Cancer in the northern hemisphere, the dry air of the subtropical high zone shifts northward. When the most direct sun rays hit the Tropic of Capricorn in the southern hemisphere, the subtropical high zone shifts southward. So when I was saying that your major deserts are 20 to 30 degrees latitude, you do have some shifting in the subtropical high. So this section right here, the subtropical high, shifts north and south a little bit throughout the year. So that leads to a biome called the tropical grassland or savanna. And that is going to be this orange area right here. So it's right here and right here, here, and you have some in Australia. So grasslands are dominated by grass, and they occur mostly in the interiors of continents in areas too moist for deserts and too dry for forests. And if we look back here, again, they're on the periphery of your major deserts, right? So here's your subtropical high. And if the subtropical high shifts north and southward, it leaves the grasslands as areas that are dry for part of the year. So the high pressure moves a little bit southward, it leaves this grassland drier for part of the year. So you get an area that's too dry for forests to form, but you do have moisture for part of the year, and that leaves it too moist for a desert to form. So there are three major types of grasslands. You have your tropical, which is savanna. You have scattered sparse trees. These are usually warm areas year round with alternating dry and wet seasons related to the seasonal shift of that subtropical high pressure. So in June, the zone shifts northward. In December, it shifts southward, and that leads to wet and dry seasons. So tropical savanna are grasslands that are found on the periphery of tropical deserts. Then you have temperate grasslands, which have short grasses and tall grasses, and those are your prairies or steppe. Temperate grassland winters can be very cold, and the summers are hot and dry. You don't have that much precipitation throughout the year, but it falls unevenly. So that is going to be in the mid-United States where you have your prairie grassland. Then you have cold grasslands or the Arctic tundra. Those are bitterly cold, treeless plains. And you have permafrost in a lot of your cold grasslands. And that means you have soil that is frozen for more than 2 years. So it's persistently frozen soil. And here are the climographs of the different types of grasslands. So the savanna, you have generally the same temperature throughout the year, a little bit of a drop in temperature in the summer. This is your dry season, and that is due to a shift in the subtropical high. And then you have your wet season here. This is a picture of the savanna. Your temperate grassland, you have a little bit more erratic pattern of precipitation. So you have low amounts of precipitation in January and February. November, December is a little bit lower precipitation than the rest of the year. You do have this dip in the middle of the summer, or the start of the summer, rather, June and July. And your temperatures are very, very hot in the summer and cold in the winter. And then your cold grassland is very cold in the winter, warm in the summer, and low amounts of precipitation the whole year, and even lower in October, November, December. A little bit in March, April is also low. That brings us to forests. The three main types of forests are tropical, temperate, and cold. And forests are areas of land that are dominated by trees. You have your tropical forests. Those are found near the equator with a warm and wet climate. This climate is ideal for a wide variety of plants and animals, and they get their moisture from the Hadley convection, where the warm air rises by the equatorial region. You get the condensation, which turns to rain. Tropical rainforests are dominated by broadleaf evergreen plants. I have the arrow showing here. This is a monstera leaf. This is a broadleaf. This is what that means, broadleaf. And the plants keep their leaves pretty much year round. There is little vegetation on the forest floor because the canopy of the trees is so dense that it blocks most of the sunlight from reaching the ground. There is very high net primary productivity in a tropical forest and an incredibly high level of biological diversity. There is fast decomposition, lots of soil formation, so the soil is thick. Tropical forests cover about 2% of the Earth's land surface, but are estimated to contain at least 50% of the Earth's known terrestrial plant and animal species. Temperate forests are in the mid latitudes. Usually, those are deciduous trees, which means that the leaves fall off in autumn. Temperate forests have cool temperatures, slower decomposition. You do have a thick layer of slowly decaying leaf litter, which stores a lot of nutrients. And then a cold forest, the northern coniferous. Coniferous means cone bearing. Those are your pine trees. You also have something called boreal and taiga. Those are basically your cold coniferous forests. Winters are long and extremely cold in these forests. Plant diversity is low, meaning you do not have that many different types of plants, and you have slow decomposition. So here is your tropical rainforest climograph. The temperature is about the same all year round. You do have a change in precipitation related to the subtropical high shift. Okay, so you have lower precipitation in the summer. And here is your temperate deciduous forest, cool in the winter and warm in the summer. Generally, you have precipitation all year round. And then in your northern coniferous forest, which is called boreal or taiga, not sure how to pronounce that, but you have freezing cold temperatures in the winter and you have warm, moderate temperatures in the summer, less precipitation than your temperate. In case you're wondering, these are your areas that are called taiga or boreal. These are your northern pine forests, basically. So that is where you find the taiga and boreal. Now, in the southern hemisphere, you don't have as much land in those latitudes anyway. So that is partly why you're not going to have large, extensive pine forests. And then this shows you major human impacts on the terrestrial ecosystems. So your deserts, these are different impacts that humans have on the deserts, grasslands, forests, and mountains. You could read through that. Okay, thank you for watching. See you soon.